Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a critically important, incredibly direct framework from Jonathan K. Holler's book, The Timothy Mandate. We are looking specifically at a real crisis in male discipleship and church leadership, something the author calls relational failure. If you look around the modern church landscape today, we've got men who gather. We have men who attend small groups faithfully every week. We've got guys who can repeat sermons point for point. But when real pressure hits, they just cannot stand. So why is that? Well, it's because the very system of how we form men has completely broken down. So today we're going to break down exactly why this is happening, what is fundamentally missing from our relationships, and most importantly, how we can completely rebuild it from the ground up.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is the uncomfortable truth that Haller presents right out of the gate. Most of what we call discipleship today, it isn't actually discipleship at all. It's really just friendship with Bible verses. Think about it for a second. We meet up at a local coffee shop, right? We talk about sports, we talk about work, we grab our drinks, maybe casually discuss a passage of scripture, and then we just pack up and go home. But we completely avoid the one conversation that would actually change something in a man's life. Why? Because we fear the awkwardness. We're terrified that speaking a hard truth might cost us the friendship or just make the dynamic super uncomfortable. So what do? We swap out the demanding life-on-life formation that the New Testament describes for something that feels warm, safe, and ultimately entirely ineffective.
See, modern discipleship prioritizes comfort above almost everything else. It actively avoids hard truths because honesty often feels like a threat to the relationship itself. We really just don't want to overstep. But biblical formation, that addresses reality head-on. It demands genuine, observable growth. Haller argues that we've quietly traded the deep, demanding nature of true spiritual growth for shallow, unexamined routines. We want all the outcomes of biblical discipleship without paying the cost of biblical proximity. And honestly, this is exactly how a man can attend a men's group for 3 solid years, contribute the occasional agreeable comment, and still remain entirely unexamined in his private life, his marriage, or his character. Guys, that is not formation. That's a social club masquerading as spiritual growth.
Which brings us to our first core section, the missing ingredients. Real discipleship isn't just hanging out. It actually requires a totally different framework, built on 3 non-negotiables: structure, correction, and expectation. First up, structure. Without a deliberate rhythm, meaning intentional engagement with Scripture, and the honest exposure of real, messy life, good intentions just evaporate into thin air. Second is correction. The discipler absolutely has to be willing to name what he sees. If he sees pride or passivity, he has to call it out. Third, expectation. Every single meeting must have explicit forward movement. There has to be a real-world assignment, a demand for obedience. This isn't just saying, hey man, I'll pray about it. No, it looks like telling a man, go apologize to your wife tonight for how you spoke to her and text me when you've done it. Without these 3 ingredients, literally nothing is being formed.
Now, listen to this incredibly uncomfortable truth. If no one is confronting you, no one is forming you. Just let that sit for a second. Haller calls this the knife line, and it cuts right to the heart of the issue. Confrontation is the absolute crucible of character formation. Most relationships break right at the point of truth, that exact moment where you see a pattern of avoidance, a drift towards sin, or the hardening of a cowardly instinct in someone you're discipling, and you have to make a choice whether to say it. Our natural instinct is to pull back, to just keep the peace. But if you defer that conversation, you aren't being kind, you're just being absent. True kindness in discipleship requires crossing that knife line.
Let's move on to the anatomy of a failure. We really need to diagnose exactly what happens when we avoid these hard conversations or when we handle them poorly. The text outlines 2 specific failure modes. The first one is the plateau, and this happens quietly. You still meet, you still pray, but the formation, it stops completely. The discipler avoids a difficult conversation once, then twice, and suddenly the whole relationship has reorganized itself entirely around comfort. Haller compares it to a river that just stops flowing and becomes a stagnant pond, and sadly, well-meaning men waste years stuck in this pond. The second failure mode is the fracture. This is when you actually name a hard truth, but the relationship breaks defensively under the weight of it. Sometimes the disciple just withdraws out of sheer pride, but other times that fracture happens because the disciple's confrontation was harsh, unloving, or just lacked deep scriptural grounding. And here's the kicker. Both of those failures usually happen right at the debrief stage. A disciple is sent out into a real-world situation. Maybe he's leading a family devotion or navigating a tough conflict at work, and then you sit down to talk about it. Think about the last time you asked a guy, so, how did it go? And you accepted a vague, yeah, I went fine, as an answer. That right there, that is where unformation happens. The debrief requires the discipler to ask much harder questions. It requires you to name what was exposed about the man's character, his fears, or his courage. But because that level of honesty feels like a threat, the discipler defers. He accepts the vague answer. And the man he's discipling just drifts further into complacency. The relationship just stalls out completely.
So how do we handle that? Let's look at the Galatians 6:1 frame.
How do we fix this stalling out? How do we successfully and biblically navigate that exact moment of fracture? Well, Galatians 6:1 tells us to restore someone caught in a transgression with a spirit of gentleness. And the Greek word used here for restore is absolutely fascinating. It's katartizo. It literally means mending a torn fishing net. Just think about that imagery for a second. The goal of confrontation is not a punishment. It's not an attack meant to tear someone down. It is a deliberate, careful act of repair and restoration. A torn net isn't destroyed, right? But it definitely can't catch fish. It's broken at a specific point, and it needs to be pulled back into functionality so it can fulfill its ultimate purpose. And that is exactly what pastoral confrontation aims at, mending the man so he is useful for the kingdom again.
So practically, how do we actually do this? The text gives us 4 concrete pastoral steps to have the hardest conversations without flinching or softening the edge. First, name what you see clearly. Don't use indirect references. Don't beat around the bush. Just say the hard thing in plain English. Second, connect it to the gospel, not some arbitrary standard. You aren't just managing his behavior or telling him to be a better guy. You're calling him to act from his union with Christ. Third, say what you hope for. We call this the Barnabas pattern. Barnabas was the son of encouragement. He saw the potential in Paul and Mark when literally no one else did. See the potential in the man and hold that specific vision out to him. Finally, and this is the hard part, stay in the discomfort. Don't drop the heavy confrontation and then just run away. You have to sit in the awkwardness with him, pray over it, and return to it week after week until there is real movement. That brings us to our final point, the ultimate telos. What is all this incredibly hard work actually for? Why do we do this? Well, we don't do this just to create better, more informed men who know a lot of Bible trivia. We do this so a man can do 3 specific things. 1, stand. He needs to have convictions that are load-bearing, so when the cultural pressure turns up and the church isn't around to prop him up, he doesn't collapse. 2, suffer. He needs a character that holds up under real pressure, deeply understanding that suffering isn't a penalty. It's a primary instrument of formation, a literal gym for his soul. And 3, send. The goal of all of this is reproduction. A fully formed disciple isn't a destination. He is a new point of origin. He must be sent out to evangelize organically and to aggressively form other men. I want to leave you with this heavy, really provocative thought today. Who are you forming, and what is it actually costing you? Haller reminds us the true discipleship costs the discipler something absolutely irreplaceable: access. It requires giving someone access to your actual life, your genuine failures, and your unguarded, messy moments with God. It absolutely does not work from a safe distance. So are you willing to let someone close enough to be formed by watching you navigate your own shortcomings? If we're going to rebuild the chain of biblical discipleship, it starts with you taking hold of your end. So think about the men in your life right now. Look at the framework we've laid out today and take immediate biblical action. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive in the Explainer.